culture today is a distaste for categorization. We do not like to categorize things in our culture today. And there is an ideological reason for this. Now, to steel man this for a second, okay? I don't like to straw man things. I like to steel man them because I don't want to critique ideas that people don't actually really hold. I want to engage with people who have different ideas than mine and let them state their strongest case and then go with that. Yes? And that's generally a more fair way to engage in good faith dialogue. Would you agree? Okay, so to steel man this distaste for categorization. True or false? Humans have invented categories at times that are meant to exclude and oppress some people. That's absolutely true. Yes? Absolutely true. And I'm sure in your mind, what came about is multiple different iterations of where you see that. But the problem is that our culture, starting in the 1960s, postmodern philosophers began to give what they thought was a brilliant commentary on the limitations of human language and understanding, and it centered a lot around this idea of categorization. And when I say that they thought it was brilliant, it's because they thought they were giving a bunch of new insights. They weren't. People have known, theologians and philosophers have known for a long time that it's possible for humans to artificially construct arbitrary categories that are exactly meant to exclude, to treat people poorly, right? That's not new. We've known that for a long time. But the postmodern philosophers came in and they provided some commentary. Now, why am I going to go into this? Because I want you to understand, church, like there are things happening in our culture today that we look at them and we think, that's crazy. Why do people think like that? Well, people think the way they think for actual reasons. Reasons that we would probably disagree with as believers, but reasons nonetheless. And if you want to be able to have an intelligent conversation with people about where your Christian faith and worldview differs from a non-Christian faith and worldview, then you actually have to understand where people are coming from. Does that make sense? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a rundown of what that ideology is, because I have spent a lot of time slogging through just abysmal books that I would not recommend that any of you read. And I read them so that you don't have to, okay? There we go. Okay, there we go. So one of the things that started happening in the 1960s is that we had this, what we call now postmodernism. Modernism carried a lot of the idea that we can figure stuff out, okay? So like the scientific enlightenment and the industrialization of the world gave humans what we would probably consider to be an artificial confidence, and we even say arrogance. And so we said, yeah, we can solve all problems by our own brilliance. We can figure out all things. We can solve all the equations. We can innovate our way into utopia, okay? That's modernism. And this stretched really, you might say, from the Industrial Revolution through about the 1950s. Now, why would this begin to end in the 1950s, you ask? Well, because if the assertion is for a long time, we can innovate our way into utopia, what happened in the first half of the 1900s that would cast some shade on that assertion? 2 world wars. And what we decided there, broadly speaking, philosophically, is we can't innovate our way. We cannot invent our way into utopia. Because what are we going to also simultaneously be doing? We're going to invent for ourselves increasingly efficient and brutal and massive ways of killing each other. And that's what 2 world wars taught us. So we had a false confidence in the West going into the 20th century that was absolutely shattered because our confidence in democracy, our confidence in science, our confidence in innovation was shattered by the fact that Europe, supposedly the democratic hemisphere of the world, devolved into multiple world wars. So then, starting in the 1960s, some philosophers began to talk about what went wrong. And one of their assertions then was, well, we cannot actually innovate our way into utopia because we can't even actually know what is ultimately true or not true. So what they did was they blamed the arrogance of the modern way of thinking we can attain truth on our own steam. And then the postmodern people said, no, you can't. You can't. And they began to construct an idea of why you can't. And the reason that you can't know truth, they said, is that whether or not objective, real, absolute truth exists, we don't know. Maybe it does. But what they said was, humans are so hopelessly compromised by our own biases, by our own personal biases, but also our social conditioning, the way that we were brought up, so that even if absolute truth exists, there's no way we can know it. There's no way we can get at it. And so what then they said was, because no one can know absolute truth, they became fascinated with, so what's going on when people claim to know absolute truth? And what they concluded was that when people claim to know absolute truth, they're not actually saying anything true. They're just using the idea of absolute truth as a way of gaining power over other people. So have you ever seen the Book of Eli? Anybody? It's Denzel Washington, and it's about this post-apocalyptic world, and everybody's trying to get their hands on a Bible. Now, why do they want to get their hands on a Bible? Because they think it's absolutely true? No. They want to get their hands on the Bible so that they can use it to control people. They want to get their hands on the Bible because they know that this human tendency to want to seek truth and to seek answers means that if they have something that looks like truth and looks like answers, they can assert a lot of influence and power and manipulation over people. Is this making sense? Okay, again, to steel man this, is it possible that people can construct narratives that are meant to give them power over other people? Absolutely, yes. Humans can do this. The question is this all that humans can do? Is this what is always happening all the time? And they said, yes, it is what is happening always, all the time. And so these postmodern philosophers then said, okay, absolute truth may or may not exist, but even if it does, you can't know it. So anytime you're claiming to know it, it's not that you actually know it, it's that you're just trying to play power games. And then what happened is they worked this into the way that we use language. And they drew the conclusion that language itself, when we speak, our words are not corresponding to any actual reality. Our words are only socially constructing what we claim to be reality, but isn't really reality. So you can then see how this gets into things like, for example, male and female, man or woman. So in the traditional Christian mindset, men are not women, yes? Comedian that I heard recently, I thought this was spot on and hilarious. Like, my favorite thing about my wife is that she's not a man. And I like that. I was like, yeah, pretty much. My favorite thing about my wife is she's not a man. But so in this, all right, so what we have is we have two words. This is what the postmodern mindset is. We've got two words, man, woman. And what they say is that, words are only signs. So when I speak, I'm just putting together like sounds, consonants and vowels, right? That's all it is. It's just sound. And then the sound is an intelligible sign, and that sign refers to something. What is the something that it's referring to? Now, Christians would say it's referring to something that actually exists. But the postmodernists would say, no, it's just referring to something that you invented. And then further, what they'd say is that the only way that you can define words is by using other words. And so the word itself, like say man, for example, you can't actually provide a definition for man, they said, aside from saying that a man is not a woman. And so then they said, so what you've done is you've created a category where you've actually, in that category, you've created a hierarchy. And so the only definition of man is not woman and therefore superior. And they saw this, now this is a logical leap that we're probably not comfortable going along with, but because of this logical leap, they began to see the very act of categorizing something as inherently hierarchical and therefore oppressive. So anytime when people categorize anything, particularly people, that came to be seen as oppressive and derogatory. So for example, the category normal. Okay, again, to steel man this, you could kind of see how that could go wrong, don't you? So I could define some things as normal and some things as not normal. And what might I use that for? I might use that to derogatorily exclude people, yeah? So again, it's fair to say this is something that can happen, but they begin to say this is all that happens. And so therefore, a philosophical and cultural movement began now 60 or so years ago, and it's gained quite a bit of steam, that is seeking to increasingly decategorize the world. And now in the activist circles, in the intellectual activist circles, this has taken on a verb, and the verb is to queer something. And the idea of this is to queer something is to try to blur any type of distinguishing boundaries so that there is no such thing as normal or not normal. There is no significant categorization or differentiation. And so then the basic idea becomes every single individual person self-determines their own identity and essence to an absolute degree. And it is then seen as wrong to exclude or categorize anyone as abnormal or dysfunctional or disordered or anything like that. You see how this works? I'm not asking if you agree with this. I'm asking if you see how it works. Because if you ever want to have an intelligent conversation with somebody who doesn't think like you actually have to understand how they think. And you have to ask them some questions, and you have to try to be charitable about it, charitable enough that you can let someone present their actual viewpoint that you can then, do whatever you want to do with and disagree with. But I would say that this ideology then amounts to, in the present day, we have decided in the language of religious language that every single person will be their own God. And anyone who will not affirm me in this capacity is doing violence to me, is oppressing me, because they are considering me to be on the outside. And this is the driving force today of, for example,